So let me start recording. Take note, our first lecture recording is already up on Moodle. The second one should be up soon as well. Let me share my screen. So today, I hope you can all see the screen.
Yes, doctor.
Okay, so
yes, doctor.
Yeah, specifically, we are looking at research methods or research strategies, the meat. Last week, we looked at approaches, research philosophies and research approach, and on which we touched things like qualitative research, deductive and inductive, or what we refer to as qualitative and quantitative type of research, or rather approaches. And we said all of this stems from it will depend on the research question that one has. And I think at a certain point, somebody talked about what referred to research methods, because we said we are talking about a research approach, and then the subject of a research method came up. Are they one and the same? No. But a research approach will lead to a research method. So the research approach will tell us how you intend to look at this matter. Which lens do you intend to look at? With which lens do you intend to look at this particular research question that you have? So we've not yet come to research questions. That will be our next lecture when we look at research questions, hypotheses, and so on and so forth. Now we want to look at research methods because it was part of the onion, if you remember, that the research question was research strategies or methods were part of the onion. So we want to look at those in detail, one by one. And if you'll note, these research methods lean towards either quantitative or deductive approach, or they lean towards qualitative or inductive approach. So the approaches we talked about will be underlying in there somewhere. So if you find yourself somewhere confused, you can stop me and we discuss and we go back to the approach. If you still remember the approaches that we talked about. So we are going to begin with the survey. So sorry, here it's raining heavily. I hope you can hear me. Sometimes people can hear me, but when you ask a question, it becomes a bit difficult. But I hope you can hear me. So we're beginning with the first research method or strategy, which is survey. So the survey research method is usually associated with a research tool referred to as a questionnaire. Sorry, a questionnaire. Well, this is a research tool. This is a research tool. This is the research method. Okay? So it is very much a quantitative approach or deductive approach research methods. Deductive or quantitative research methods. So this it is a collection of information that is standardized in a standardized form. These are keywords. Collection of information that is in a standardized form. What do we mean? If you receive a questionnaire, each one of you, that is asking you for your name, your age, qualification, and then goes ahead maybe to ask you questions on very, very specific questions on your feelings towards, for example, Zoom. And it is this perception is actually measured. Okay. For example, they give you a scale from 0 to, sorry, someone that keeps calling me, from 0 to, let's say from 0 to 5, 0 meaning maybe completely disagree, and 5 meaning highly agree with the situation or love something so much. That is very standardized. It's very different. It would be very different if, for example, I sit with Arthur and I ask him, oh, by the way, the other day you had a lecture on Zoom with Dr. Sheba. How did you feel about it? And the other day, there were technical issues. What happened? How was your day disrupted by that? Then I go to Moses and say, Moses, the other day the lecture was disrupted. Was there anything that was disorganized because of that? We realized our question, that the question to both of these, to the two participants, is not standardized. As a researcher, I'm asking questions that may bring about will obviously bring about different answers. But with a survey, it's a very standardized form, because you're basically limiting the respondent to specific measurable variables, which makes surveys collect data that is quantifiable. Okay, quantifiable, and this is very much qualitative or deductive approach when we can measure something. So in this survey, this quantifiable data is normally on variables. So we pick specific variables, very, very specific variables on which we want to measure something. Okay? So if we were to find out what the word variable means, do we know what the word variable means? Do we know what the word variable means?
I believe a variable could be, hello?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
I believe a variable in this case could mean things like hypothesis, things like questions, the themes, yeah, something like that.
Hello?
Yes, please.
As I understand the variable, I think it refers to what outcome we are trying to test for.
An outcome which we're trying to test for. So it would be almost, we're almost there. If you look at Google, the dictionary, it will say an element of feature or factor that is liable to vary or change. So for example, if I am asking you about perception, your perception or your experience with a particular ICT or e-learning tool like Zoom, I'm asking for your experience with an e-learning tool like Zoom. The experience, your experience is a variable, okay? So the experience itself is the variable that we are looking for. Now, Andrew, for example, if we are looking at 3 people, Andrew, Arthur, and Abu Bakr, 3 people. Andrew's experience is not the same as Arthur's experience, neither is it the same as Abu Baker's. So the variable is experience, but the content, what it contains, varies. Okay? So we want to get experience of the three towards the experience with Zoom. Then we get the experience with Moodle, the experience with maybe WhatsApp as far as e-learning is concerned. So that experience is a variable, okay? And that variable would be embedded, would be part of a hypothesis or a research question. Do we understand? Do we understand that context?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. I hope you can hear me. The rain here is pouring heavily. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so just to give you a further illustration, let me see if I can get a whiteboard. Just sharing. Okay. So let's say we have a hypothesis, because someone brought up the issue of hypothesis, and this we shall go back to it when we actually do have talk about hypothesis. So let us say we want to do a survey on acceptance, on adoption. Of e-learning tools. And we want to measure, we have a hypothesis. Let us say we have a hypothesis which says, we're going to say hypothesis 1, which says, let us say it says, increased increased it's increased learning experience oh no, sorry, let me first redo this. So e-learning tools, the synchronous, it's a synchronous have I spelled this right? Is this the right spelling of synchronous? Does anyone have the correct spelling? I don't want to misspell something here. Synchronous. Let me first see if I can get it. Synchronous. Okay, I think I have it here. So if it says synchronous, sorry, the handwriting is not right. Synchronous e-learning tools create increased learning experience for learners. That would be hypothesis 1. Hypothesis 2 would be asynchronous e-learning tools do not create increased learning, the same thing, eh? The other one is opposite of the other. I think we get it, right? So those are two hypotheses that a researcher can decide to say, let me go and test this out. Now, do we know what synchronous, the difference between synchronous and asynchronous tools? Do we know the difference?
Yes, I can try, Doctor.
Yes, please.
Synchronous means the online teaching. It basically means online. Then asynchronous, this is the physical.
Okay. Now, both are online. The difference is synchronous is ongoing. Like for example, Zoom, it's live, whereas asynchronous is something like Moodle, where I can upload something for you and then you go back in your own time to deal with to at your own. It isn't real time. So that's the difference between the two. So for example, synchronous would be Zoom. Asynchronous would be something like Moodle or WhatsApp or any other tool that one may be using. So in this case, the researcher would be looking at these two hypotheses. Yes, please, a question?
I was wondering whether we could say it is right to say that asynchronous means tools where there is two-way communication at the same time.
Yes, please.
Whereas then asynchronous means one-way communication at the same time.
Yes, please. That is exactly it. Thank you. So imagine this is the research, and then the question would be, how would we measure increased learning experience? Yeah, how would we measure it? And then the question, let's say if I can wipe this out and let me first rub this off, and then the question then is, how do I measure increased learning experience? Okay, scientifically, how does one measure increased learning experience. So I'm not an educator, so I wouldn't know. There must be theories that point out increased learning experience. Maybe when we look at retention and things like that. So let us say, let me see if I can get a pen here. This is for drawing. Can we get, let me see if I can, yeah, I think this is fine. Eh? So, how do we measure learning experience?
Today was the club.
Sorry.
And waited here almost an hour.
Zatim, do you have a question?
No.
Okay, kindly mute. Eh?
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. So let us ask, how do we measure learning experience? Okay, the question is, how do we measure learning experience? So I'm going to assume, because I'm not in any way a professional teacher. Maybe learning is measured by retention. Maybe it is measured by attendance. I'm just assuming. I'm just assuming. Remember, I'm not in any way a professional teacher. Okay. Then 3, performance. So what would this then be? These would be our variables. Okay. These would be our variables by which we measure. So imagine our class now, currently, let's say we have 24 students in this class, and we want to measure your ability, if there is increased retention, increased attendance, increased performance, when you're in Zoom as opposed to when you're in a physical, no, okay, let's say in Zoom, if there's greater retention from content than when you're in a physical class. And then we also measure the same for Moodle. If I decide to put up content for you on Moodle, and your ability to retain, to maybe to even to be problem solving, your ability to problem solve, and we measure for each one of you these variables. So these would be the variables, and for each one of you, the value changes. The value within this variable changes. Okay. Then at the end of it, we quantify how many have a greater retention because of Zoom. How many have a greater retention because of Moodle? How many have greater attendance because of Zoom? How many have a greater attendance because of Moodle? And performance and so on and so forth. So these would be the variables that we measure based on those two hypotheses. Do we understand the two concepts, the variables and hypothesis?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, we shall discuss hypothesis further, but this is now just to explain it to you within the context of a survey. So let's come back to our survey. So normally the survey is looking for correlationships. So just like I gave you the example of when we talk about correlationships and causations, just like I gave you the example of asynchronous and learning experience and asynchronous and learning experience. Okay, the correlationships, which one brings greater learning experience? Okay, so normally this is what a survey does, and that is typical deductive or quantitative research. So, oh, I don't know how this, so the survey itself, this, let me see if I can remove this. I don't know how they came into each. Let me first see if I can remove this, because this may be a little bit destructive. Discard, okay. We go back. Okay, so I think this is a bit better. So our surveys normally focus on naturally occurring phenomena. So the typical example is what we've just discussed, asynchronous and synchronous. So these are things that are naturally happening within the everyday environment. So this will be quite opposed to the next thing that we're going to look at, which is experimental research or laboratory experiments, which is very much an artificial environment. So a survey, we would do it with people who are currently doing something, who are experiencing it or have experienced it. That's what we mean by naturally occurring. And it is focused on something that is measurable. Okay? Something that is a behavior that is measurable. Oh, sorry, this tends to hang. Put this back up there. Okay. So the survey data is primarily quantitative. It's a primarily quantitative research method, although some people may include qualitative methods within, or maybe an open-ended question within a survey. It's possible to have your survey which has purely quantitative questions which are measurable. Then at the end, someone may decide to include an open-ended question which allows the respondent to be more free with their response, the response that they give. So bear in mind, quantitative type of research or deductive type of research is very much controls the response of the respondent, very much controls the response of the respondent, but qualitative tends to be more flexible and allows the respondent to truly give maybe what they feel, maybe in shorter terms, in terms different from the researcher, but it gives more flexibility to the research. A key thing within qualitative research is this concept of sampling. I'm sure most of you have heard of this, sampling. Because most of our research with most of the surveys, or rather quantitative research focuses on width rather than depth. It focuses on width for purposes of generalization. Then the more people respond to your survey, the more opportunity you have, the more you can generalize your response, rather your findings, and what you can report back. So the more people, the better. However, realistically, you can't interview or you can't administer your survey to the entire population. So what a researcher does is to sample, pick out a certain percentage of the population that is representative of the entire population. So here, if I just go back slightly, I think I've given this example before, but I can give it again. Let us say we find out, we want to do our research on synchronous and asynchronous learning experience with all students, a survey. Now, if we decide to do with UMU alone, that's a very small number. And it's not representative of all universities which are doing synchronous and asynchronous e-learning. One might say, I want to do all universities in Uganda that are actually using e-learning tools. And then you say, but you're not going to interview all students. So for example, if UMU has a total of 5,000 students, both masters and undergraduates and PhD, then you have Makerere, which may have, let's say, 10,000. It might even be more, like maybe 20,000. Then you have UCU, which has maybe 6,000 to 8,000. Then you have Nkumba University, which might have maybe 15,000. Chambogo University, which may have maybe another 30,000. Okay, well, it can't have more than Makerere, but let us assume all this number of students, and each one of them is exposed to e-learning tools, both asynchronous and synchronous. And then you say, I'm not going to interview all of them. So there are sampling techniques which you can use where you can calculate a portion of that total population. And it may extract for you maybe from each group, from each university, a certain number of the population. And even you go further where you create a social strata, or rather a population strata, to say these are undergraduate, these are postgraduate, these are PhD. And of these ones, these are female, these are male. And then it gives you even a formula to say, if you pick this number of females, this number of males from both undergraduate and postgraduate, and so on and so forth, and from each class, you will have something representative of all programs. So you find someone may actually have maybe a total of, maybe in UMU, it could be 100, at Makerere, it could be 1,000, at this other Kumba might be 800, something like that. It really reduces your size, but using that calculation, you've sampled that and say, if I administer to 800 students in Nkumba, it will be representative. If I administer to 1,000 students at Makerere, it is representative. If I administer to 100 students in UMU, it will be representative. And it cuts across. That is what we refer to sampling. Now, there are different types of sampling. It's really an in-depth study. It's another whole lecture. We won't get into that, but to understand that we do have sampling in survey. It's quite rare for our ICT students to do survey type of research. But anyway, just for us to know that this is there, and we can have even further lectures if time allows, but I doubt it. However, let's move on. Before I go further, do we have any question on sampling?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, please.
Does the sample size affect the research results?
The sample size now, for quantitative research, it matters. Yeah. The sample size, if your research is purely quantitative, the sample size really matters. If your research, that is where to be safe, if you cannot, maybe in terms of expense or time and so on and so forth, it would be better one does either mixed method or a research that leans more to qualitative, but uses quantitative methods for purposes of triangulation. But if you're doing predominantly quantitative research, sample size really matters. It must be representative of the population you're targeting. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, please, doctor.
Yes. So surveys can be done with, as much as, yes, we are talking about our surveys, the research is normally deductive in nature. It can be, which is explanatory. That is this is where we mostly fall with explanatory research, which look for causation or correlationships between variables. If you can't do a survey which is descriptive in nature, That is, you want to give a portrayal of specific variables, maybe which may be of interest to a certain population. Maybe we want to find out a description of students who lean towards e-learning more than towards physical classes. One can decide to do that kind of research. Students who easily adopt ICT for learning purposes, and those who are opposed, one can decide to give a description of that kind of user. That is okay. A survey can also be used for exploratory purposes, but this is quite rare to form a general idea of what kind of variables exist, but this is quite rare. Exploratory research is normally leans towards the qualitative side. Now, also surveys can be used for longitudinal surveys. We talked about this, the cross-sectional and longitudinal types of research. It's possible to have surveys in these two types of research. Then surveys can be done face-to-face, but however, if it is a large population, this can be quite expensive. This is where you find a researcher will hire research assistants who will go and help people fill out surveys. As a questionnaire is being administered, you have a research assistant who helps the respondent fill out a questionnaire. So this would normally be, for example, in cases where the respondents may not be literate, or the language maybe in which the questionnaire was written may not be their local language or their native language or a language that they understand. So in that case, you may need research assistants. We've seen this more or less, although it's not research, but it's done almost in the same case when government is doing census, and they have a questionnaire, and those people collecting data more or less are research assistants in quotes. A survey can also be done via mail. That means a questionnaire is posted to a respondent fills it out and sends it back to the researcher. It can be done via the telephone, where somebody calls and then the questionnaire is filled out. Then it can also be done via the web. Now, either one of them, the web is something that I'm quite familiar with. I think most of you may have seen Google Forms. Google Forms is one simple format one can use to collect data, where a questionnaire is sent to a respondent via their emails, and they receive a link, they fill them out, and when they send it back, automatically a database is created, which can be downloaded using Excel. There are also other tools which can be used. For example, I think there is SurveyMonkey, and there are others which can be used, and where you design your questionnaire, implement it in either Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, send it to your respondents via email, and then wait for a response from your respondents. So essentially, the design of the process of using the survey method starts with the design of the survey. So the design of the survey, of course, begins with a hypothesis, which variables you wish to measure, then designing of a questionnaire. The designing of a questionnaire itself goes through a process, because the questionnaire must be tested. Once it is approved, then it is then sent out, again using any of the methods that I pointed out earlier, either post it or do it face-to-face or via the web, depending on the type of respondents that you have. Before you actually send it out, you determine your sample size, send out your survey. That survey, the data is collected with, then it is then analyzed, and then presentation is made or communication. So some things you need to consider. This can already be pointed out. Your population, the population size, accessibility, how easy is it for me to get them, literacy, and the language that they use, okay? So these questions are all really, really important. One of the key things I want to say to you is, whereas the survey method looks very easy, it also has a high number of risks. I remember I was sharing with an office with a fellow PhD candidate, and I think her primary method for data collection was survey. And she said this was in Europe, she sent out her questionnaire. I think she was using either one of SurveyMonkey, one of those web tools. And she sent it out, and it had been, I think, over 2 months, and there was very, very little response back. And she was panicking because she was saying, I don't know what to do. I've sent up follow-up emails, I've called, and it was very, very difficult for her to get back data. And that can become really, it becomes a risky point for you. So the question of who am I going to get this data from? Will they comfortably respond to my questions? Will they have time? Will they be willing to participate? Are they willing to participate? I remember some time back, I remember when COVID hit, and a lot of people were doing research to try and on the COVID issue, and they would send the questionnaires via email, and you'd see their colleagues sending, saying, please, our colleague has sent you something, please respond. But even with a plea, everything depended on, do I have time? Do I really have time to get online and start responding? So accessibility really matters, whether your respondents are literate or not. Also, other cases, I've also seen this I saw this with one of my students. He also wanted to do the same thing, but he had to actually, some people will tell you, especially if you are dealing with a poor community, they will tell you, if you want information from me, first pay me. That's my time that you're taking up. So all those issues, accessibility, literacy levels, all those things really matter. So just to point out to you some of the things that do come up. Do we have any question on survey before we move to the next research method? Do we have any questions? No, let's move on. Our next is experiment or laboratory experiments. So this is another deductive style of research. It's very, very quantitative in nature, really, really quantitative in nature. Again, for those of you who in the IS class, and even others, you can just have a look at that article that I posted, which talks about the hedonic experience of using certain smart technologies. And it's a laboratory experiment. So here you have a research method that deals with highly, highly controlled environment, highly controlled environment. Whereas survey, we say the survey is what is being done in a naturally occurring phenomena, meaning in a natural context. Laboratory experiments is a highly controlled environment. Whereas it's also dealing with hypothesis, same thing as a survey. It's a controlled environment where we're looking at an independent variable, and its effect on a dependent variable. So an example of an independent variable, the hypothesis I gave you earlier, the synchronous tool like Zoom is independent. Your experience is the dependent variable, okay? Zoom can either give you a negative or a positive experience. Do we get it? Is that one clear?
Yes, please.
Yeah, the difference between an independent variable or an independent variable. So that is what we would be measuring. The effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable. So again here, let me first. So move it back here. So what you have is a manipulation of the independent variable. You select a dependent variable, assign subjects, tests, or people who you're going to study. Then control extraneous variables. So the control of the extraneous variable, take an example. What's an extraneous variable? If I want to know the effect Zoom has on your learning experience, okay? In a natural environment, right now we're in a natural environment. Here I am, I'm teaching you, it has been raining outside. Zoom is done, needs a stable environment. Now, the rain is the extraneous variable that can cause an effect on Zoom, which may negatively or positively, or depending on how you look at it, may cause an effect on your learning experience. For example, if the network connection goes off because of the rain, that's going to cause an effect. It will not give me the very clear, or how do I put it? I want to say that the precise answer, but I don't want to, whereas not saying that in a naturally occurring setting, rain will come, okay? Rain will come and it will disrupt the network. A technical problem will arise with MTN or Airtel. That's the natural way of things. One of you, maybe your child will walk in as you're in the classroom, crying, "Hey, mommy, I'm hungry," or something like that. A phone call may come to me as I'm teaching. That's the natural part. But if in a laboratory experiment, I need to remove all of those so that I can have that without any of those things, what is the effect of teaching via Zoom to the learning experience if I remove all those, what we refer to as the extraneous variables? So we must have a control over these variables. And that's the advantage of the laboratory experiments. When you want to have a very clear answer on whether there is something positive or negative about a research. Now, I want to take you back. Again, IS students, again, for the ICT students, please look at these articles that I gave them. You saw the article, the second article, which was referring to an action research. Do you remember that article? IS students, do you remember that article?
Yes.
Yes, so there was that
Yes.
article or the action research, which was talking about
Yes, doctor.
Yes, the group where it was a groupware application that was implemented within an organization. And they said that the researchers said that the reason why they were motivated to do this research, they implement, for the sake of the other classmates, in case you haven't read, but let me just repeat it. This particular research, it's an action research project where this group of researchers implemented a groupware application within an organization for purposes of improving communication in top management. So essentially, think of a groupware application like